Do you know how miserable it was for families without sons in the countryside in the past? In village meetings, my father had no say. During the New Year's Eve dinner, my mother couldn't join the table. Even when the siblings divided the family, we could only get a dilapidated adobe house that leaked everywhere. It wasn't until I was 5 years old that my mother became pregnant again. Oh, when my mother gave birth to me, she lost a lot of blood and almost didn't make it. In the following years, she didn't conceive again. The midwife in the village said it was probably because she had harmed her body and wouldn't have children again. When we split from my uncle's family, I was 4 years old. Dad was very angry at the time. I contributed most of the money and effort to build the new house. Why should I only get a mud brick house? Big sister lifted her clothes to breastfeed her nephew. You don't have sons, why do you need such a big house? You see, all 3 of my boys need a place to live when they get married in the future. Grandma agreed, girls will get married sooner or later, and you'll have to rely on your nephews in your old age. Dad's spirit was instantly shattered. Now it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But nephews were considered family, while daughters belonged to other families. Such thinking was common at that time. Dad came out of the main room and sat on a large stone in the yard with his head down. The moonlight was bright, casting a thick shadow beside him. I walked over and wrapped my arms around his neck from behind. Dad, I'll take care of you and Mom in your old age. He patted my back, his voice choked. Good, Shiaxia is really good. In the end, we still moved to the adobe house. The old yellow ox and plowing tools were all given to my uncle. We only got a quickly falling apart foot-operated rice thresher. On the night we moved, my mother tried many times under the stove, but the fire just wouldn't ignite. This house was built by my grandfather, using yellow mud bricks and thatched roof. With no one living in it for a long time, the dampness in the house couldn't be dispelled for a while. After a box of matches was used up, my mother suddenly covered her face, and her shoulders kept shaking. Dad poured water from a leaking water tank into the house silently. Mom hugged his waist, crying, "Wah." That night, I slept on the bed in the north wing, and the cold wind pierced me from all sides. I curled up in the hard quilt, silently praying, "Let my mother have a little brother. This way, she and Dad shouldn't be so sad." Perhaps my prayer was heard by the heavens. My mother soon became pregnant, oh too. Everyone in the village said that since my mother had a pointed belly and liked sour foods, it must be a boy. Dad said sons and daughters were the same, but during dinner, he told my mother, Zhang Detu invited me to go to Guangdong to work together next year, saying there are many opportunities there. The village women asked me, "Shiaxia, do you want a little brother or a little sister?" Without hesitation, I said, "A little brother." The women laughed, "With a little brother, your parents won't love you anymore." I retorted anxiously, "That won't happen. I'll always be my parents' treasure." The women laughed even louder, completely unaware of how frightening those words could be to a 4 or 5-year-old. By then, the one-child policy was already in effect, but the policy stipulated that if you had a rural household and the first child was a girl, you could have another. When the time came, my mother took action. She suffered for a whole day but couldn't give birth. Early the next day, before dawn, Grandma went to the village butcher and brought back a large piece of pork and a pig bone. When she brought the meat back, my mother gave birth, and it was a sister. Grandma stood in the yard holding the bag of meat, and the midwife greeted her, "Go in and see your granddaughter, she's so white and fat." "I won't bother, the boys at my place are still waiting for me to make breakfast." She left the bone and took all the meat away. At that time, life was hard, there was no extra money, and every family loved to eat fatty meat, while bones were cheap. I went into the house to see my sister. She was wrinkled, with a rosy face, like a little old man, Far from the plump image the midwife described, my mother lay weakly on the bed, staring at the thatched roof, tears streaming down her face. Dad smoked a cigarette. "Don't cry, the baby is born." My mother gave birth during the harvest season. Grandpa and Grandma were busy at my uncle's house, and Dad and I were busy harvesting rice. My mother lay in bed for 3 days and then got up to cook for us. As a result, she developed a condition, and her body ached on rainy days. That year, during the Chinese New Year, my 2 aunts from the city also came back for the reunion dinner. Big sister accompanied them to play mahjong, and my sister cried hungry. Mom and Grandma were busy preparing the New Year's Eve dinner in the smoky kitchen. After a busy afternoon, it was finally ready. When my mom had time to feed my sister, she found that there was no place for her at the table. Dad and my second cousin got up from the table, but Grandma stopped them. "Why bother? Let's eat in the kitchen." "Oh, 3, it's too unfair." I pulled my parents, wanting to go home. Mom hugged my crying sister and patted my head. "Children don't understand, let's eat." That night, leaving my uncle's house, Big sister smiled and stabbed my mom in the heart. "Sister, you're actually much easier than me. You don't know how hard it is to raise 3 sons." That night, there was no moonlight. On New Year's Eve, every household lit up their lights. The dim yellow light covered the muddy roads in the countryside. I asked my parents in a low voice why they had to endure. Dad was impatient. "You're just a kid. You don't understand." Mom's face was soaked in shadow, who told me I couldn't give birth to a son. They didn't believe that I would support them in their old age. Dad didn't go to work in Guangdong. Because there were no sons, there was no need to build a new house, so we had to make do. They say the countryside is simple, but when these people get out their knives, they're more ruthless than anyone. I don't know when, but my dad gained a nickname, Zhang Luzi Zhang the Mule. A mule is a hybrid of a horse and a donkey. It cannot reproduce. The village needed money to update the genealogy, and someone jokingly suggested, "Let's exempt Zhang Luzi's family. They don't have sons, and it's too much to ask him for money. It's too unfair." Dad kept silent, and Mom could only complain with tears at home but put on a smiling face outside, not daring to argue. I couldn't change them. I could only make myself stronger. If they called my dad Zhang Luzi, I cursed their whole family as Luzi mules. My older cousin bullied my sister and me. I bit with my teeth and kicked with my feet. Even if I ended up bruised and swollen, I would tear a piece of flesh from them. Grandma took away the chicks just hatched from my house, saying she was raising them for us. As they grew, they became my uncles. I chased after them and took them back. Big sister tied the yellow ox to the edge of my family's land and ate up a whole patch of newly sprouted hollow vegetables. She hypocritically said it wasn't intentional. I opened the gate of her vegetable garden and let all the chickens in. They pecked away all her vegetables. She was furious and cursed at me with her hands on her hips. I argued back, "If you dare to eat my vegetables again, I'll use a sickle to cut down all the seedlings in your field." Gradually, I became notorious in the village. Those aunts always advised me, "You don't have brothers, your temper is so big. In the future, when you marry, there won't be anyone to support you." My mom sighed as she looked at me. "With her like this, she may not be able to get married." "But Mom, I'm just protecting you, protecting this home." In the blink of an eye, my sister was about to start kindergarten. On that day, 2 major events occurred that would impact my life. 04. First, it was the first day of kindergarten for my younger sister. The teacher taught counting. After just 3 repetitions, my sister could count from 1 to 100. The substitute teacher, who was from the village, praised my mom, saying, "Your Kikyu is much smarter than Xiaoxia." Second, the eldest uncle of the same family was diagnosed with stomach cancer. At that time, there was no medical insurance, and for rural people, getting cancer was like a death sentence. However, unexpectedly, the daughter of the eldest uncle, who had completed secondary education and worked in the city, took him to the hospital. After removing more than half of his stomach, the eldest uncle survived and chatted with the villagers about the interesting things during his hospital stay. If there was only one chicken leg, it definitely belonged to her. If she didn't want to eat breakfast at home, my mom would give her 50 cents to buy corn cake. I only received such treatment when I was sick. Every Chinese New Year, my sister would definitely have a new set of clothes, while I wore old clothes brought back by aunts. During the autumn harvest, my sister didn't have to go to the field. My mom said, "Your hands are meant for writing. These tasks are not for you. Kikyu, you must study well and bring honor to our family." Indeed, my sister was very smart, always ranking first in the class and receiving awards every semester. At that time, the value of those awards was much higher than it is now. I have to admit that a large part of studying depends on talent. I worked several times harder than my sister. I slept at 11 every day and woke up at 5. An anonymous figure in a novel, and that person at class reunions. My mom always nagged in my ear, "Xiaoxia, you are the older sister. You must protect and support your sister. You don't need to repeat it, Mom." A few more sets of exercises. If I had carefully checked every exam, would my life be different? But that's a significant expense. If you two could study together, your father and I. Sigh. The poor connection of the incandescent light bulb made a crackling sound, like a saw cutting through my heart. My parents looked at me silently, waiting for me to say, "Forget it, I won't go to school." 05. My sister innocently said, "If the sister wants to go to high school, just go." I studied junior high school in the countryside, and it's the same. Dad scolded her, "What do you know? Can the countryside be the same as the city? Other girls in the village are going to work. With your grades, continuing to study is useless. If you were a son, it would be different. For a daughter, why spend so much money? Let her go to work early to help you build a house. Your current adobe house might collapse anytime." Before school started, when my mom gave me living expenses, she repeatedly reminded, "It's not easy for us to support you. Be frugal and don't spend too much." 12 hours of work a day, a month off for 4 days, and if you don't complete the tasks, they deduct money. Facing those parts every day, I'm going crazy. Xiaoxia, studying is better. There's a foreign company across the street. Those white-collar workers wear high heels, apply lipstick, and sit in the office. It's much easier. Korean dramas were popular then, and I chose the major of business Korean. I set a goal for myself. I must enter a foreign company and work in a cubicle. Although I wasn't as diligent as in junior high school, I didn't slack off either. I worked hard. Roommates went to internet cafes to play games and watch dramas, while I usually went to the library to check information or practice speaking Korean with Korean dramas. As long as there were no fatalities, teachers didn't care. To save travel expenses, I usually didn't go home. Every time I called my mom, she always repeatedly reminded, "Don't cause trouble at school, save money, and your father and I work hard for the money." I rarely bought new clothes, always had only 2 sets of underwear to change, and never touched cosmetics. When going out with roommates, I felt guilty even spending 2 yuan on the cheapest lemonade.